I think everyone's starting to come in. Thank you to everyone for joining tonight for the real estate seminar. We're pretty excited, as everyone knows. Kyle and I talk frequently about real estate, realtors, VA loans. We are unsurprisingly not experts, but we have purchased homes, so of course we've done it once, and we therefore want to opine on it. As much as I'm kidding, we actually do have some experts that we often talk to. We have a lot of people that obviously ask a lot of questions about everything from the VA loan to just using real estate as an investment tool, and the nuances that exist both as just a home buyer, as an investor, but also as a veteran, given that we have this awesome tool called the VA loan. So tonight we have three people, each has a little bit different perspective. The first we're going to hear from briefly is Matt Eden. He'll introduce himself and what they do at this cool platform they have called MilMove. Second, we'll hand it over to JD, John Modrak. He's a VA loan guru that we've partnered with and that we really like. And then Andrew, he's here too. He's more of a multifamily home investor. So Matt, I will let you take it away to introduce yourself. Each of these participants are going to talk to us about what they do, and then once we're finished, we'll go into a panel discussion. We have a bunch of questions that followers have submitted to us today on the page. So Matt, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. How you guys doing? So today I'm going to kind of give a brief overview of what we do at MilMove. And then funny enough, my normal presentation has like the top 5 questions that people ask me. So we'll kind of jumpstart some of that Q&A as well. That way we can focus on some of the more specific questions you guys have. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with y'all. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we'll go ahead and put that in present mode. Very nice. Okay, sweet. So I'm Matt Eden, co-founder and lead agent for MilMove. Prior military myself, I'm USMA 2018 grad. And so we really founded MilMove with the military and veteran family in mind. I myself have been through a bunch of PCSs. My business partner's been through a lot of PCSs. And what we found is really lackluster representation. And so we really wanted to found MilMove to combat some of that. So our mission is to use our personalized and branded systems and processes to help veteran and military families relocate or PCS without the stress anywhere within the United States. So we've got an agent at every duty station in every major city in the US prepared to help you guys. Our system really starts with our client intake questionnaire. So this is a really thorough questionnaire that does a deep dive into a lot of the specifics. So your family structure, your timeline, your branch of service, your rank, all of those things, whether you bought a house before, how many kids you have, pets, it goes super into detail, because then we take that information, we put together a personalized PCS survival guide built specifically for your family scenario, timeline, duty station, and family type. So from there, MilMove then assembles the necessary team of agents and lenders to fit that client's timeline and list or purchase needs. So what they actually get from us physically is that PCS survival guide, and that's preloaded with all the DD forms you need. It has a breakdown and a comparison of DD versus PPM move. It has guides to the local area. And so the reason we get so deep with our questions, if you've got kids of a certain age, it'll have childcare or school recommendations. If you've got animals, it'll have vet recommendations. It goes down to the minute level to provide you every resource you could possibly need. And one of the big reasons we focused on this is a lot of the spouses ended up doing PCSs while the service member is, at a training location or, clearing post or whatever. And so we found that that's a huge struggle for a lot of spouses. So this really is both for the service member and the family to reduce that amount of stress. Okay, so after we put our team together, we put together a winning strategy based on the market conditions in both the market that you're moving into and the market that you're moving out of, in order to optimize the highest sales price on the list side and the best outcome on the buy side with no gap in housing. So we've got a half a dozen different strategies that we really focus on, but one of those is the temporary occupancy agreement. So say you reach out to us 6 months before your PCS date, and we know that average days on market in your area is 75 days. We would take that and we would backwards plan. Maybe we list your house early based on the season that you're going to be listing in. Maybe we list that early and you get a temporary occupancy agreement post-closing. That gives you the time to then go find what you're looking for at the duty station you're moving to. A lot of the real stress in the PCS process seems to be from those things not lining up. And so this is all about streamlining that for you. Couple of things with MilMove agents. MilMove agents are all military spouses or veterans who've been through countless PCS moves and fully understand VA loans. And so one of the big things to understand with this, a lot of agents out there will market themselves as military friendly agents. Like all of our agents have done this the same way that you're doing it. And we also understand the secondary and tertiary effects of like, hey, we pushed closing a week, but you have to report, and oh yeah, your household goods are already in the other location. So we understand the actual ramifications of what we're dealing with.
So JD Modrak, I was in many of your shoes in the last 5 and 10 years, probably. Got out of the military in 2014, so just over 10 years ago, which seems crazy. Did do my MBA, definitely have not taken a traditional path since then. Get a lot of weird questions about that. And knew I wanted to make a career in real estate, but frankly, it's like pretty hard to do, especially back then. It's gotten a lot easier. So we'll touch base on this later, especially within kind of my portion, how to get into like a serious, what I would call big boy real estate career, not buying, no offense, duplexes or single family homes or becoming a flipper, because honestly, none of those things are going to make you super wealthy. They're going to grow your wealth, but they're not going to make you super wealthy. And if that's your goal, like big boy real estate careers, like real estate private equity, working for major developers, things like that, that used to be accessible to veterans are a lot more accessible now. So I took a pretty non-traditional path through ops. Ops turned into asset management. I used to run hotels, but I loved VA loans. And Andrew and I are actually business partners. We met while I was in business school. I won't say this in front of 200 people how we met, Andrew. It's not as weird as you guys are probably expecting, but it's technically against the policies. So Andrew and I have been buying multifamily real estate for about, I don't know, 9 years together. And then Andrew, you're way longer than that. And myself, I've been buying for about 10 years total. And throughout that time, I discovered the power of the VA loan. And almost by happenstance and luck, like I didn't start using the VA loan until I was making a pretty good amount of money post B school. And so we'll touch on that real quick. In that process, though, I fell in love with the VA loan, and it was something I kept coming back to. I eventually ran out of VA loans. I ran out of available, frankly, residential loans, and knew I wanted to go full-time into investing alongside Andrew. But that doesn't pay the bills, frankly, especially when you stay as small time as we are. So I became a lender. And so Andrew and I partner on a lot of stuff, and then I lend pretty much about a third to 40% of my loans are specific to transitioning vets, and most of those are MBAs. A lot of them on offer letters, just separating from their MBA program. So I thought I'd lead off actually with a few generic things that just like cover like why I got into this, but also why I think the VA loan is so powerful. And then hopefully some of those will start to answer some of the questions. So like one of the things that like really kills me is less than 20% of veterans use their VA loan at any given time, which is like a wild stat to me. So like one of my calls to action to everyone on this call is like, take some of these lessons and spread them around and make sure other veterans go use them. When I approached Wyatt for this partnership, that is my thesis. Like more veterans need to be aware of this. More veterans need to coach other veterans and disseminate best practices here, and also stay away from some of the, frankly, fairly predatory lending practices that do happen with VA loans, and in some ways on the realty side as well. VA loans are by far the cheapest mortgages of it, full stop. They have government-backed insurance, which is worth, in many cases, tens of thousands of dollars. and you pay little to no fee in order to access that PMI. Wyatt, were you going to say something? Saw you come off mute. Okay. Everybody knows you don't need a down payment. You do have a few percent in closing costs. You should always assume on the high end 3%. And I think a good lender should represent 3%. It's often less than that for various reasons, but like make sure you got 3% of the purchase price available. You don't pay PMI, which is mortgage insurance. So essentially, almost every other loan type where you don't put 20% down, you're paying that PMI. It's in the form of a funding fee. But especially a lot of you more recent separators, like you're getting VA ratings, you don't even pay that. So actually the VA program is actually flipped to be unprofitable. It actually used to be profitable. It's now lost profit because so many people aren't even paying their funding fees. And it's straight up lower interest rates. Veterans pay their debts. And so as a result of that, something called default rates are lower for VA loans. And because they're lower, these are much more attractive loan types. It's not the VA involved. It's not the government setting the rates. It is the capital markets that say, these are great loans. These are loans that pay. And frankly, they're also loans that people hold on to for longer and refi less often and sell less often. So all those things mean that VA rates are typically about 0.5% less, 1/4 to 0.5% less than what you see advertised in the market for, like, let's say average mortgage rate today. And then on top of that, like recently in the last 5 to 6 years, Trump uncapped it's kind of a Blue Water Act, it was called in 2020. He uncapped the total amount you can spend in a VA loan. And that actually becomes really critical because a lot of people think that you can only use a VA loan once. You can have multiple VA loans outstanding at once, but that's not necessarily, it can be advantageous, but it's not necessarily the best way to go. But because VA loans have no limit on them, if you already have an outstanding VA loan, you then do get capped on how much more you can spend, typically to around $800,000. So if you're a first lieutenant, all you could afford was a $300,000 mortgage. That's pretty likely, or an E5. You got a $300,000 mortgage. Your next VA loan is going to be limited typically to about $500,000. There's exceptions there, but frankly, in most places where there's exceptions, the homes cost so much more, the exception barely helps. When you get rid of that $300,000 initial VA loan through either selling it or refinancing into a normal mortgage, you can now, let's say post MBA, you're making a couple $100,000. You can go spend over $1 million using a VA loan, which is pretty insane. So that's why I got into the business, kind of using those to buy multifamily buildings. You know, multifamily buildings, 4 units and below, aren't going to make you a 100 millionaire, frankly. One, because of the loan products. Two, because they're overpriced, frankly. But they're a really, really great way to get your feet wet and get some access to the markets. And frankly, with some sweat, beat the S&P. So just a few calls to action. After the call, I'll send out some resources. I'll send out links to some previous articles. Many of them Andrew and I write together. We'll send out a survey, or I'm sorry, it's like a brief like form, essentially, not really a survey. If people are interested in getting into the multi portion, we'll make sure we send out an actual sign up list for that. If people want to come to a longer form free seminar we run for people who want to quote unquote house hack. And then a lot deeper dive on VA loans and articles that kind of cover some of the like actual numbers and quirks of loans. But yeah, like I think some of the big takeaways is like a lot of questions came in about the VA IRRL, the EARL is the nickname. It is a good loan. The problem is a lot of the people who sell them aren't good people. VA loans are shoppable. There is plenty of their margin there for lenders. And so you got to make sure you work with a reputable lender, and it probably shouldn't be some big name franchise that has their name on a stadium. And, you know, feel free to reach out, utilize some of the articles we're providing, and then we'll kind of hop into some of the questions and hopefully deeper dive some of this. And I'll pass it to Andrew. Draz, mute.
Hey guys, Andrew Dorazio here, Army vet. Got out from active duty in 2012 and hopped right into consulting. So if anybody wants to talk about that sweatshop lifestyle, I'm happy to talk offline about it too. But I did that for about 8 years, post military. But all along the side of it was investing in real estate and had kind of real estate side jobs as I was going through my W-2 career. I bought my first multifamily property in 2008. as basically a brand new second lieutenant. Made every mistake under the sun, so I can, my goal a lot of times is to help people avoid some of those things that I did as a 22-year-old. I had caught the real estate bug early on, as many of you probably did. I read Rich Dad Poor Dad in college, and it kind of like opened up a few light bulbs in my little brain. So. So I went, I started buying small multis at first, and then got a little bit bigger. And I realized over time that it was easier to buy a 11 unit than it was to buy a duplex. And so, another light bulb went off and said, okay, maybe we should focus on these type of, deals. And, I got my real estate license in 2015 and did on the side, friends and family, use that money, any commissions I made there to invest in more real estate. And it literally was every dime that I had got plowed into buying more properties. And luck had a lot to do with all this, but JD and I happen to ride a pretty big bull market, and we're still kind of riding this wave. And but today, I have my own brokerage. We have a mostly all military or veteran agent team here in Chicago. I love to scream from the rooftops for people to use their VA loans. As Matt and JD mentioned across here, it's it's a wonderful tool that I've helped dozens and dozens of people use to buy multifamily real estate over the last 5, 6, 7 years. On top of the brokerage, we own a property management company that services most of all of our buildings here in Chicago. And then there's the investment arm where basically we syndicate deals. Our typical avatar property is like a 6-unit standard Chicago, 3 front, 3 rear, where we find some level of value add in the building, whether it's adding ACs, um, for better or for worse, digging out the basements and turning them into apartments, and a number of other value add plays. We like mismanaged buildings mostly. So how I can help you guys, I've been doing multifamily real estate for 15, 16, 17 years now. I made a lot of mistakes. I can help you kind of avoid some of those. Um, I love doing that because I wish somebody was there to grab me by my throat back in 2008. And it's super important to work with an agent. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a veteran, so to speak, but in Chicago there's only there's a Navy base here, and there's some Army stuff here too. But when you're looking at multifamily deals, it's really critical to partner with somebody, lender and realtor, and attorney for that matter, who know what they're doing when it comes to real estate, when it comes to multifamily real estate. So there's a lot of nuance there that we can help guide you and avoid some of these pitfalls, and kind of help you win in this market. So anybody wants to hit me up, I don't care what market you're in. If you want to talk real estate, happy to chat anytime, and I can help kind of link you up with some investor friendly agents as well, depending on where you're at. So thanks for this opportunity to chat, and I'll give it back to you, Wyatt.
Great. Thanks to you three. I think that was a great overview. Really excited to hop into the next half hour or so into a panel, and then we'll have brief breakout rooms with each of our panelists afterwards. Everyone can kind of ask questions that they see face to face. First question I want to ask. We'll start with you, JD, then Matt, then you, Andrew. When you're picking a realtor, so many people, when they're looking at how to choose a realtor, you do it once, twice, maybe 3 times in your entire life, and it's not something that people want to admit that they don't know how to do, especially most of us that want to believe that we know what we're doing. What do you recommend for people, for you, JD, and Matt, residential, and Andrew, when you're looking at multifamily? What do you look for in a realtor? How do you suggest someone evaluates a realtor and decides who to go with? JD.
I love when I get this question because it means that clients started in the right order. I firmly believe you should talk to a lender probably earlier than a realtor, because you're probably wasting realtors' time if you don't know if A, you're qualified, or B, how much you're qualified for, and based on the area you plan to buy. We actually provide a screening document for this. It can really vary though. Like obviously the VA, if the use of the VA loan itself is a critical factor for deciding the type of realtor you're going to use, because different realtors are going to have different skill sets around loans, and especially around the appraisals for the VA loan. And talking to a lender first will actually inform whether or not you should use a VA loan. About 30% of my clients, I actually push not to use their VA loan. Especially a lot of you ask questions about buying as an 01 or an 02 or before your MBA. It's pretty rare that at those income levels, you're going to truly maximize the value of your VA loan. And you're often better off going with Home Possible, Home Ready, or FHA loans in those cases. And so that can sometimes minimize the criticality of using that type of realtor. I think also really, it is not easy to, but it is really critical to make sure that your realtor has market of not just your general geography. I think people think I'm a realtor in Chicago. That means you're going to know everything about all of Chicago. And most of you guys on this call have probably lived in a big city at some point. That often couldn't be further from the truth, even in smaller cities. There's quite a bit of regionality to realtors. And so even Andrew and I, he probably gets pissed when I say this, but like when somebody's looking on the north side of Chicago, I don't usually recommend Andrew. No offense, Andrew, but like one, doesn't make sense for him to drive there, and two, like he's not an expert on stuff that's almost in Wisconsin. He might take the loans, he might take the deal from time to time, but I think knowing the submarket is critical. And as a client, you have to be a prepared client. So I think half the time when you go to select a realtor, the most important work you're going to do is actually, prior to selecting that realtor, establishing what some of your bona fides are and things that are important to you, like exact zip codes you want to buy in, your spending thresholds, your affordability, and then testing that realtor against some of those things. Happy to pass it to you, Andrew.
So, JD, we agree on a lot. There are a couple of things there, just like inherently, I think we probably disagree a little bit on. One of those is like, I think sometimes working with an agent with broad understanding and like kind of a broader area of coverage is important if you're more focused on the best bang for your buck rather than a specific submarket or area. I will say, like, from an agent perspective, we kind of talked about like the agent experience, total transaction count, whether they own a home themselves, total VA volume, I think is important, their agent network. And then on the list side, I'm really big on their list to buy ratio. So if you're looking for a listing agent and they do 85 or 90% buyers, probably not the right person to list your home. I also look at their list to close percentage. So how close to list price do they end up closing most of their listings out at? And that really tells us two things. One, are they providing proper expectation management to their sellers when they actually list the home? And two, are they conducting proper comparative market analysis when they're pricing the home? And so I think that list to close percentage goes a long way in providing that information. Social media presence is a big one. I hate social media. I hate the video game, but everyone in real estate is doing it, and that's how we're reaching folks for the most part. So the presence is really important. And then the value proposition from a listing agent, the listing prep itself, right? Like if someone is willing to give you a list price without coming and seeing your home in person, that's not a good agent. They need to come walk your home, give you an idea of what it's going to take to prep your listing, and then they need to give you an actual price. You also want to look at their marketing package, whether or not they're staging your home, and whether or not they plan on conducting open houses and broker opens. Their ability to conduct expectation management and their ability to bring negotiations together, probably one of the most important things on the agent side. And then I think the last thing is their ability to contextualize a problem set. So to really listen to the family, listen to the client, and dig deep into what they're actually asking for to provide context and help them weigh, their necessities, right? And in a lot of cases, help people tell the difference between a need versus a want. You're not going to get 100% of what you want in a home. So getting them to that 85 or 90 is what it's all about. on the like retail primary residence side of things. And then I'll pass it over to you, Andrew, to kind of talk about the investor aspect of it.
Yeah, thanks, guys. A lot of good info there, and I'll echo some of it. But the big thing on the investment side is has this agent walk the walk before, right? And I will tell you, there's a difference between being a multifamily investment agent and being a multifamily investor, right? I have the benefit of having the lens of both sides, and I think that gives me a little bit of a unique advantage over some folks that just sell real estate, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, you know, if that's your jam and you don't want to invest, and maybe you can't invest for a number of reasons. But I think it gives agents a dangerous perspective when it comes to helping you buy your multifamily property. And so there's a lot of nuances in your market, right? And so in Chicago in particular, and this applies to most places, but there's specific things in a lease that I'm going to look for and I'd advise you on, or advise you to walk away from a property if there's stuff in there. The due diligence on these properties is really important and it really matters. So inspections, there's certain things I look for in multifamily buildings that I might not really care about on a residential home. I've really good, we own a property management company, right? So rents aren't closed rent numbers aren't actively posted many places like sold homes are, right? So finding rental comps can be challenging sometimes, right? And so as a property manager or own a property management company, we have a really good idea of what a 2-bedroom, 1-bath in Ukrainian Village is going to rent for, right? Depending on its finish level. So those type of insights are going to be able to help me tell you whether or not a property is going to be a good investment in year 0, year 1, year 5, whatever the case down the road is. I also have a good, or not necessarily me, but an agent that you're going to want to look for is going to have a good perspective on lending on these properties as well, and maybe not advise you on it, but kind of coach you on maybe what type of lender to go talk to, or what type of loan product might be a better fit for that particular property. So I would say just look for the experience, ask the questions around due diligence, right? Like, and what that realtor is going to do to help you from a due diligence standpoint, because there are a lot of ins and outs in multifamily, and you want to have someone in your corner that's got the chops and the experience to know what to call out as BS and what to say is good. So
Awesome. Thank you for that. The next question, kind of continuing on this realtor question, we'll start with you, Matt. You talked a little bit about post-settlement, and we're not going to discuss numbers specifically, but how you as the seller, obviously, the realtor seller buyer relationship, you're using a realtor possibly as a seller or a buyer. It's obviously a business relationship. You're providing a service, and you just talked about how to evaluate a good realtor. But is there, should you be negotiating post settlement? How, what does the industry standard look like? Again, for those of us that buy, that do this once or twice every, 10 to 20 years, how should you think about dealing with your realtor? What is kind of industry norms to negotiate? What do you typically think of? And when, I think we were talking, Matt, that you shouldn't always look to negotiate down. You should look to, to identify quality, but what's appropriate? So Matt, maybe start with you.
Yeah, so that actually is one of the questions I get a lot. And I'll say, first and foremost, right off the top, each individual agent sets their own compensation rate, and there truly is no standard. So if you ever are in a listing appointment or buyer consultation with an agent, and they say, well, hey, this is the industry standard, or hey, this is the standard rate, that in and of itself is an antitrust violation. So we're actually not even supposed to have discussions with other brokers about what they charge. Each person sets their own rate for themselves. So I'll say, like, there are numbers that you hear online, and some of those are in the realm of possibility. I think rather than using specific numbers, I think you have to consider that you get what you pay for, right? And right now, who you choose to use as an agent is more important than ever. And the consequences of cheaping out are through the roof. Now, with that being said, I think a consumer has to evaluate the value proposition of the agent they're interviewing, and they have to decide for themselves whether or not that service is worth the rate that the agent is asking. I will say, in my experience, there are some agents who are super firm on their rate. They're like, this is the rate. I'm not going down. That's it. And others are a little more flexible. Like for me, I will negotiate, X fraction of a percent, up or down, depending on what we're talking about. If they're asking for additional service, I may say, hey, I want another, say, quarter of a point if you want me to be that hands-on, if you want me to manage your renovation, right? Or if somebody comes to me and they're like, hey, I'm going to bring you 6 deals in the next year, right? I'm probably going to be willing to come down a little bit more than I would for like a one-time sale. And so all that to say, some agents are firm on compensation and others are not. And it really never hurts to ask. But when you ask, you really need to have an honest conversation with yourself on the value prop versus what they're actually asking.
JD, maybe you take the next, take a whack at this.
Dorazio hates how much I negotiate everything in life. I'm like the ultimate retrader, which is a capital sin when you buy multifamily real estate at the commercial level. But I didn't negotiate much when he bought me my house. I think I got a pretty nice smoker out of it. It's funny, my attitude towards negotiating commission with real estate agents, because I was negotiating things like this well before the NAR settlement came out. It's predicated on a few different things, but it's changed over time. The more deals I've seen fall apart due to ineptitude by agents, the more I value just paying the fuck up. But all of that is said with a better awareness than most of you guys are going to be able to have on a good agent versus a bad. I probably interviewed like 8 agents for the duplex I bought in Minneapolis a few years back. It's kind of a joke. And he refused to cut my commission. And, it's like somebody refusing to go home from the bar the first time you meet them. I almost respected it, right? That's the one I wanted to marry. So I like straight up, like, I think that at times the problem with negotiating on these things can be the people that reject you are almost the ones you want to work with. That said, the higher the price, and I can talk more openly about this stuff, guys, by the way, because there are way less clear lines for me than for the realtors on this call, Andrew and Matthew. But like, the question for me is like, how hard of a client am I going to be? And how much extra am I asking outside of the usual scope of an agent? And if you as a client don't even know what that usual scope is, you almost need to have that discussion with them. How many homes are you going to tour? I dragged my first Redfin agent through 50 homes. And that poor guy made a $2,500 commission on $1 million purchase. I can assure you Redfin makes a shit ton more than that now. We got an $8,000 rebate check. And we told ourselves that like, we were going to learn the process. So we were going to hire the worst agent possible because we knew we couldn't trust him. And this was not a good plan, by the way, because the deal almost fell apart a few times. But we always say in a deal, like good deals, normal deals, you only need one person really that's capable between the agent and the 2 lenders, or I'm sorry, the 2 agents and a lender to get that deal across the line. In this case, we luckily had a good lender and a great selling agent. If the selling agent wasn't great, my deal would have fell the fuck apart and I would have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Straight up, that is the amount of equity and cash flow. You can ask Andrew, that deal has pumped 7 or 8 future investment checks into other deals for us. And our buying agent was a moron. And we had no idea what sellers, what basically a seller's note was. It was our first deal ever. And the selling agent happened to bring it up, negotiated it directly with the sellers for us, and got us out of a real pinch because our VA loan fell through. So I've just had numerous deals as both a lender and as a client that have gone sideways. And my thing is like, I'm not saving that much money in the negotiation. Like if I save 20, 25 bips, which is like 0.25% or maybe 0.5%. Like, am I willing to buy that lottery ticket hoping this deal is going to go smooth? Or am I just going to spend the extra couple grand to make sure that this deal goes smooth if things go wrong? We fleeced a selling agent this year on a academy buddy of mine's purchase. I won't say his name, but I have permission to share his story. Like, the appraisal came in 11% under ask, and it had already been cut 8% in the prior 8 months. And it was in Tampa, which is a falling knife. And the selling agent had no idea that there is an appraisal review process and challenge process through VA loans. And because he didn't know that, Corey, I think you're on the call. He's my boss. Corey wins a ton of these. Like, a majority of them, we get all the way back up, if not, well, all of them over halfway back up, unless it's a really bad purchase price, which would indicate a problem with the buying agent, frankly. And this guy had no idea what they could challenge. And my client saved $72,000 on purchase price. So my commission, the buyer's commission, the commission he pays his agent times 3. And it's like, the buying agent didn't know that there's an appeal process either, but I had to coach him to be like, do not bring up the appeal process when you talk to the selling agent. He's like, what if he asks? I was like, play dumb. And the reason is because it's the selling agent's responsibility to know about that, to ask for it. I'm not going to volunteer that we could pay more for the property as a representative buyer. And, you know, like, that's what you pay up for, right? I saved my client over 10 times what I made. And you want generally capable folks in your corner. If you're trying to buy a really basic $250,000 single family home, sure, maybe it's pretty vanilla, but like, how much are you actually going to save? So those are the questions that often run through my mind. If you're buying a $1.5, $2 million condo in San Francisco, hell yeah, I'm negotiating that all day, to be perfectly honest with you, especially if you're like going to be a pretty easy buyer and you can communicate that and agree to that and set some standards around that.
I don't have much to add here. You guys hit a lot of nails on the head, but on the investment side of things, I think, you know, what value do you bring is the most important. And you know, I'm typically okay hearing people out when they negotiate, but I look for ways that we could win-win together, right? So a lot of times on the multifamily side, we have a property management company as well. So I'm willing to either give people some reduced property management fees, you know, for a year if they buy through us, or you know, maybe a rebate on their closing because they're gonna keep using us for management down the road. And I love giving property management fee reductions. It's like my selling point. So I'm never opposed to people trying to negotiate. I think, but you're gonna on the investment side, a good agent is going to save you more than he's going to cost you in this process, and typically by me knowing how much rent should be, by me knowing what the local cap rates are, by me knowing what a building's value should be and what it could be in the future, and what value add items you could do to it, and advising you along that, I'm gonna be worth every cent of my commission. And I typically work to try to make it so that the you know, the buyer's not coming out of pocket. You know, both sides pay for both sides realtors no matter what, right? In the transaction. But I'd rather the seller come out of pocket at closing than the buyer have to come up with additional cash to pay me. So that's what I'm typically gonna work towards. But yeah, a good investor agent is going to be worth way more than they charge.
Next, I'm going to shift to the unique way that the vets can buy a home. That's with the VA loan. Obviously, if you're still in service, you're going to have that you know, equivalent of mortgage insurance. Those out of service, we'll start maybe with you, Matt. We'll move to JD and Andrew. Could you talk through when to use the VA loan and maybe when you shouldn't? And kind of in that is if you already have a VA loan, you know, someone like myself, I just bought a home with a VA loan. You know, if I move and I'm thinking rent versus buy, you know, or rent versus sell, using my VA loan, transferring that, when should I be thinking about a VA loan? When should I not and use a conventional loan? So Matt, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think JD kind of touched on this already. you really want to look ahead, right? Like where you're heading post service, and have an idea of like, what's your income goal? Where are you looking to be? Because I'm in a situation where, I bought a house in Nashville, little rental home with a guest house. I rent them out separately. They cash flow really great. But when I went to buy my farm, I had to put 25% of the difference between my remaining entitlement and the purchase price. I had to put a pretty large down payment down. Whereas if I had bought that other house, FHA or something of that nature, that would be free and clear. And I could have done zero money down on like a, 1.7 purchase price. And so the idea of like, should you use your VA loan or a different product? Should you buy or rent? There are really a lot of factors, but most of it is about looking ahead and where you want to be, and then backwards planning off of that. There are a lot of factors to consider and a ton of nuance to it, but that's the general idea.
Andrew, let's go to you, thinking with especially multifamily investments.
Yeah, so there's a lot of nuance between the 2 to 4 unit space and the 5+ commercial space. And I love when veterans use their VA loan to purchase 2 to 4 units. There's a lot of things to take into consideration though, and when if it's the right loan type to use in that certain circumstance. But if someone's going to buy a 4 unit, for example, is there a unit that's going to be open for them in the next 60 days for them to move into? That's going to be a big consideration. Is there work that needs to be done that might trigger something on the VA loan appraisal to come in and might require work prior to close? So there's certain things that on a particular building that I might try to advise around using one loan type or another. But yeah, I'm a big proponent of people using their 2 to 4 unit purchase to use their VA loan there. Now, if you're going commercial, 5 and above, there's really not too many options outside of putting 25% down on things, and so typically there are lenders though that have different and unique loan products in those spaces, and some will offer better rates, but have different prepayment penalties. You're typically not getting a 30-year fixed loan on a commercial grade property, right? A 5+ unit multifamily. You're typically on a 5, 7, or 10-year fixed rate, amortized over 25, sometimes 30 years. So in those circumstances, knowing some of those loan nuances up front is super important, because we've helped a lot of buyers buy stuff in that space, and when they talk to their first lender, they're kind of shell shocked when they don't have a 30-year fixed loan. So I think having a good agent on your side to kind of guide you through some of that is super important. But yeah, there's a lot of different nuance in all these, and I like I said, I love when veterans use their VA loan to buy 2 to 4 unit properties.
Yeah, I mean, I call it a dirty COE, right? So a COE is a certificate of eligibility, and like, you can get yourself in a pretty rough situation should you ever decide to do one of 3 things. Like, you buy the dream home, right? Or if you're dual remote and you plan to occupy it enough, you buy the dream second home with a VA loan, and it's going to be pretty pricey. Or you're trying to get into multi, which doesn't always make sense for people based on, number of kids they have, where they want to live. Are there even, multifamilies available in the neighborhoods they want to live in or the cities they want to live in? But when you want to go to that next stage of life, maybe your income has doubled or tripled from what it was in the military, your COE can work against you as much as it works for you. And the reason for that is because, as Matt alluded to, if you already have a loan on your COE, you're limited on how much you can spend to about $800,000 for all intents and purposes. But what's important there is like getting that home off the COE can become challenging. So in order to get a home off your COE, you have to refinance it or sell it. And you technically can only refinance one time to get a home off of your COE. Now, this gets fucked up all the time. And so, like, for instance, I refinanced a home and frankly, into a VA loan, and somehow my COE cleared up, which is awesome. Don't tell the VA. But like, you know, generally you use something called your silver bullet, which is a one-time entitlement restoration. And so if you were an 01 and you bought I have one of these this week. I told her it was a record. Two of them actually. Like an 01 buys a $200,000 place in Bob Beach, then buys a $300,000 place in Duty Station Y, and then buys a $500,000 place with 25% down on the difference. That's a super dirty COE, meaning you are probably not going to be able to, when you graduate from B school or get out of the military and make six figures, possibly joint six figures, maybe 300,000 to 400,000 total potentially, you are not going to be able to utilize that VA loan. And Matt alluded to some of the costs on the down payment, but there are material costs beyond that, right? There's interest rate costs. So as I said before, the rate's higher. So imagine you used your VA loan to save 0.5% on 150 grand. I have clients who are like, that rate's 2% on my $150,000 house. I'm not getting rid of that. It's like, dude, let me show you how to do math. Like, they didn't teach us this in the military, but like that 0.5% on $1 million home is actually going to save you more than the 4% on $100,000, right? The PMI is super material there too. So it often can double that interest rate savings, because the PMI you might pay if you then can't afford to put 20 or 25% down on the next asset is hugely material.
JD, just a question. The PMI, if you have any disability rating, you don't pay PMI, correct? Do I understand that correctly?
I mean, if you can then not use your VA loan again and you have to use a conventional or an FHA, you have to pay PMI. So like when you don't have an FHA or a VA loan available rather, and you have, because your COE is dirty, let's say, if you're then likely going to be paying potentially PMI, you're going to be paying a bigger down payment, you're going to be paying a higher interest rate, and you're also going to have a loan with less flexibility. A lot of you guys asked about an IRRL, and IRRLs themselves are amazing. Okay, the people who sell them are not, right?
Can you describe what the IRRL is, and then
yeah.
I actually think most people don't understand even what this is, and
exactly, it's the cocaine of the lending world for VA loans. All right, like great drug, shitty sellers. All right, like the problem is probably over half of IRLs are sold by call centers. Right, they're people who just like pound phones all day, can't answer the second question you ask them, and they give it a pretty bad rep. But they are like some of the lowest documentation required, some of the fastest to process, and the least quirky loan types. And they have some of the best interest rates because lenders compete for them. And they can compete hard, and they're not going to charge you the same margin as they charge for a purchase mortgage. Or they're at least,
when can you get an IRRL? Because I get.
Yeah, you have to have a VA loan already, right? And so by keeping that entitlement clean or being able to clean your entitlement up, you're also giving yourself a much better ability to subsequently refi, which is the circle I was trying to come back around to. Sorry, it takes me a while. But like having that IRRL is another tool that's just not available to you if you already burned your VA early in your career. If you burn your VA early in your career, not a big deal. There's ways to get that back. They just get more difficult. And frankly, I'm often convincing people who never would have been convinced before because they're cash flowing $700 a month on a 2% interest rate to sell their homes. And there's many reasons for that. But like the big reason is something called return on equity, which will be linked in an article we'll send out after this. You have to learn how to do return on equity calculations. And that's basically saying like with your cash flow, with how much mortgage pay down you have, and then an assumption around how much you think that market's going to grow, what is your rate of return on the equity in your property? So, you know, if a client has an $120,000 loan, but it's taking up $250,000 of entitlement space from a 10-year-old loan, right? So maybe they have 120 grand left to pay off. They're saving a couple grand a year, like call it $4 grand a year in interest. But if they have 300,000 in equity on that property, meaning that they could sell it and make 300,000 tomorrow, the math you need to do, why we've talked about this before, right? Is like, how much would that 300 grand make me in either the market or buying another asset? And generally that number gets hard to catch when the amount of loan you have is less than 30 or 40% of the total value of your current asset. If it's 80 or 90% and you got a great interest rate, you're likely going to want to stick with it unless you need to free up that entitlement for $1 million place. But we see this quite often, especially some duty stations where people are buying sub $300,000 assets. So much better off to the degree you can wait 6 months and do an FHA loan to keep that entitlement clean. even if it costs you an extra $120 to $150 a month in PMI, while, you know, in order to keep that VA loan clean.
Yeah. So last question before we split up into, some breakout rooms. Matt, we'll start with you. When do you talk to people about selling versus keeping the home to rent when you're on the other end? You know, so if someone is PCSing, that's obviously something you guys deal with. How should people think about this problem? And maybe from a financial perspective, and also just from from the hidden cost, burden of owning a home kind of perspective.
Yeah. So say you're PCSing and you're trying to decide, hey, am I going to sell my house? Am I going to rent it out? I usually have people look at it as a cost benefit analysis, or kind of like an opportunity cost. So you kind of want to look at the amount of equity you have, what your proceeds would be from selling, and see if there's a different asset class that you can put that money into that is going to return a higher cash on cash ROI than what you're currently getting, what you would currently get if you rented out your home. I think that's probably the simplest way to do it. But the other thing you want to consider is, hey, if I'm borderline and the numbers are kind of like pretty similar both ways, do I have the capacity to be able to be a landlord? Do I have the cash flow to be able to hire a professional property manager and still hit the like cash on cash returns that I'm looking to hit? So I think when you look at it, that's really the lens to consider. You also want to include like 10% for CapEx. So, hey, say your microwave, HVAC, roof, like any of those capital expenditures go up. You really want to do about 10% for a house that's 5 to 10 years old. You're going to want it to be more if it's an older home or older systems. And then you probably want to do 5 to 10% for vacancies as well. So a lot of times people will run their numbers based on 100% occupancy and 0% CapEx. And then they're shocked when they run their numbers at the end of the year and they're like, oh, I didn't make anything. When you're analyzing it, you really want to look at all those factors.
Yeah, I can go next, JD, if you want. I look at this as from an operational lens, right? Do you want to be a landlord, right? I think there's a lot of personality types out there that are fit for it, and there's some that aren't. And if you want to hold that thing as a rental, either you're going to try to manage this thing from afar, or you're going to pay someone to do it for you, right? And typical PM fees in most bases are going to be somewhere between 7 and 10%, sometimes more, depending on the asset type. So you're gonna pay someone a good portion of that rental income to maintain that thing and to keep it filled and to run it operationally for you. If you're gonna try to manage that thing yourself from afar, like it's almost like a second job sometimes. So sometimes it runs really smooth, sometimes it doesn't. So I think from when I'm talking to clients and whether they're going to hold a property or sell it, I try to gauge their interest in their abilities to want to effectively manage that property. And walk them through the costs of it, right? Because a lot of times people do get sticker shock, Matt, when they realize at the end of the month that their rental income did not go as far as they thought it would, and their first AC goes out in the middle of summer, and effectively wipes out every dollar of cash flow that they were planning on having. So. And some people's personality types just aren't suited to deal with people like that from a landlord basis. So sometimes I'll advise folks to really take a hard look at inside themselves whether they're going to want to do that or not. So that'll be my typically the way I approach things at first before going into some of the financials of it.
Yeah. So I mean, the first part of our seminar that we run, which is like a half-day deep dive on this stuff, doesn't touch any of the stuff when it comes to buying multi that I think people usually expect. And hopefully they come away with value still, but it's like, there's so many things about setting goals, especially if you get partners involved, where you're going to source capital from, when, what life events you're going to get into. You got to consider a lot of the basics before you jump right into assuming that multi is a good deal. That said, if you're going to just jump right in, that's far better than a lot of people I see who like sit there and analyze this shit for 2 years. Because like, guys, like I think even with 90% of this call being veterans, 80% of the people on this call are smarter than your average small-time real estate investor. One of my favorite parts about multifamily real estate, especially the scale that Andrew and I stay at, like the boon and bane of our existence, is we are far smarter than most people we're competing against, which is good because hopefully we're buying better deals and doing them better. It's bad when you have to negotiate them, bad when you have to interact with them, but like it is not a high talent space. The crazy part about that is it produces pretty much more millionaires than just about any other line of profession. And the reason for that is leverage, right? And the VA loan is offering you some of the most crazy, both dangerous and incredible leverage out there. One of my favorite stats is we kind of run the math on this in what I would call a reasonably conservative margin scenario. So Matt was addressing margin, right? Usually you could take, depends on the market, somewhere between a 65 and 75% assumed property margin. If you were assuming 75, it better either be really high rent or really, really, really self-managed, your elbow greasing region. But we assume under 70%. We take the margin on that, right? Today, I think it's really, we take that margin and you project that out over time, right? And you grow the rents at a very reasonable amount. If you never cash flow a property, which by the way, like anyone who's asking about cash flow right now, it's incredibly challenging on multi. When you lever a deal to 100%, right, you are not likely cash flowing. And the reason for that is related to the relationship between cap rates, which is the rate of return that investments offer in relation to their sales price, and interest rate costs. If you are paying a 6.5% interest rate and your cap rate's at 6.5%, that's zero cash flow. Because the amount you're paying the bank is equal to the amount you take away from that property every year. Now, if you buy well and your rents are a little bit under market, or you operate even better, or you rehab the units, you will create cash flow. And what we like to say is you don't need to get lucky, you just need to get old. However, so like if you basically just buy a 4-unit building, let's say you buy $1 million 4-flat in Chicago, my favorite example because the math is fucking easy. We generally see between 10 and 20K in closing costs, but let's assume worst case you have a $25,000 closing cost. You invest that 25K. If that property never gives you a dime of cash flow over 30 years that you're paying it off, it never grows in value, which would be fairly unheard of in any real estate market in this country for it to sink in value, except for maybe like Detroit and Cleveland in the 60s and 70s and 80s, right? If it never grows in value and it never cash flows you a dime, but 30 years later, you white knuckle that deal. You hold on to it, you keep your mortgage paid. Even if you, in the model we do, you lose about 5 to 10 grand a year for the first 5 years, right? Which is not all that uncommon, by the way, on 100% leveraged deals. You get a 13% return on your money. And that is due to the leverage, right? So you start layering in things like cash flow, especially if you reinvest that cash flow, and you layer in 2% even growth, and your IRR, which is effectively a proxy for your compounded rate of return, right, grows to 15, 18, 22. I'm not going to state what some of our IRRs have been because we were buying most of our VA loans with multi in a zero interest rate environment, and they were cash flowing on day zero, even with low rents. But like, it is a pretty amazing deal, but it is not a cheap one. And so I think if you have 15 grand in your name, and you just heard me say that 15 grand is all you need to get started, you're not ready yet. You probably need to assume you got that 3% to close, and then you need another 6 months of what's called reserves, which is you multiply the total mortgage payment by 6. And that is conservatively the least amount you should have to get started. So that's usually running you around 50 grand. These aren't cheap, but I mean, for us, they were kind of life-changing purchases. And you're not going to look for home runs every time. You're just looking to hit singles and doubles, hold them for a very long time, and very tax efficiently grow.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt, Andrew, and JD. We're going to jump into breakout rooms for as long as the panelists will go, whether that's 10 minutes, 30 minutes. I'm sure, JD talking shop will probably be as long as anyone wants to talk about VA loans. So I will open those up. again, for Matt, Matt's someone that has seen real estate markets across the country, can be a real resource to you if you want to know how to move, not just as someone that's PCSing, but also as someone that's looking to move geographies. He's helped a lot of people. Andrew, if you're interested in, investing in multifamily homes, how to think about that. And then JD, if you have questions about specific VA loan stuff. So I will create these right now. You can jump into